Hello to you all and welcome to the Pitcast by us here at the Pit Crew Online, from the fans, for the fans. In today's episode we are discussing a doubleheader in Bahrain. Last weekend, November the 29th, was the Bahrain Grand Prix. The weekend after that, December 6th, the Sakhir Grand Prix. A doubleheader in Bahrain, delivering very different results but plenty to talk about nonetheless. So to discuss this, I am your host today. My name is Luca. And first up to discuss it with me is Deputy Editor James.
Hi, Luca.
Hello. And also with us here is the Editor-in-Chief, Crew Chief himself, Simon.
Hi, Luca. Hi, James.
We're ready to talk about the cluster that was the, both Bahrain Grand Prix for very different reasons. So first up, there's not much to talk about within the Bahrain Grand Prix itself. We actually had planned to hold off a week to discuss the Bahrain Grand Prix along with the Sakhir Grand Prix, even before the race itself started. This was not as a result of pushing it back to be respectful out of the, as a result of the action of what happened with Romain Grosjean, but we must obviously talk about that because I think I could speak for many of us when I say that we were all quite horrified, the scenes that we saw, but as is the case with F1 evolving in terms of its safety, Romain Grosjean was able to extract himself from the safety cell of the car, and despite it burning, he got out with only like a few burns to his hands, and which I think, obviously, we're very happy that Grosjean managed to make it out. It would have been cast a really dark shadow over the F1 world had he not. And so I want to just throw this firstly to you, James, to talk about exactly how far we've come in terms of F1 safety.
Yeah, I think, I can't remember who said it, but whether it was Grosjean himself, but 5 years ago, that would have probably been a fatal crash. Even a few years ago, because everyone's been saying it's the halo that saved him, and that only came in 2018. So, yeah, it's one of those crashes that I can still remember seeing it. And I think when you've been watching Formula One or any motorsport for long enough, you get these kind of gut feelings sometimes when you see a big crash that you think, that's not good. That's not one they're walking away from, and I'm so glad this time we were proved wrong. That I remember seeing that and seeing the fireball and just thinking, that's it. There's no chance he's coming out of that. And I've never been more glad to be proved wrong.
Yeah. As far as we've seen many fatal accidents in the motorsport world. I, for one, was actually up very early on the morning of the Malaysian MotoGP back in 2011, and I saw Marco Simoncelli, his fatal accident, and that still haunts me. I think, especially in the light of, because I wasn't awake on the morning of the Japanese Grand Prix 2014, which Jules Bianchi eventually succumbed to the injuries from, and I wasn't watching the F2 race last year at Spa, so just seeing that was really sort of like very unpleasant, and thankfully it had a happy ending. The halo, which I think if I recall correctly, I saw a piece on social media. Jules Bianchi's mother actually texted one of the French F1 commentators and said that that Jules Bianchi's crash, which started a ripple effect to get the halo introduced, has saved Romain Grosjean's life. And I think that collectively everyone in the F1 world heard that and just sobbed, because Jules Bianchi was such a beloved individual and a promising young driver, and he was taken far too early from us. But the legacy of losing him means that so many more can be saved. And so I've got to ask you this, Simon. The halo, do we have a very different opinion of it now?
Well, personally, I do. I hated it when I first saw it. I couldn't see how a driver could see through it, how it improved open racing cockpit. It just seemed to fly against that in every way. But, I have to hold my hands up and say, if it saved one life, I think it's done more than that. then it's been a good thing. And we've got used to it. Formula One cars are very different now to when I first started watching racing, and which unfortunately goes back a long way now. So I'm sure that
was F1 around back then?
Yeah, just about.
Sorry,
I think it was still just the European Grand Prix Championship.
It was Nigel Mansell, and there was Senna and PK, and no one else really mattered.
Typical.
But like Luca said, I going back on what he said about Simon, I saw the Senna crash and the Roland Ratzenberger the day before that, and that lives me to this day. I think more because at that age, I hadn't lost anyone, so death wasn't real to me, and that kind of brought it home. And I'm watching things go downhill from there. But I think that one will always live with me.
Yeah, obviously, the race itself. After that, I mean, there was obviously that Lance Stroll flipping, which I think a lot of us just sort of saw, and our hearts dropped again because we'd already seen with Grosjean. The race itself was rather eventful, but in the end, it was a sort of a typical result. Lewis Hamilton came home to win, and everything was expected to just go on as normal. Now, Pietro Fittipaldi came in to fill in for Grosjean, and we thought that would be it in terms of driver movements. Why are you laughing, James?
Oh, because I remember the morning after, like the Monday morning or the Tuesday morning, I got up early to do some work, and then just everything happened on Twitter, like you're going to allude to. It's just the F1 world kind of exploded.
Yeah, that being, Lewis Hamilton became the third driver to be diagnosed with the coronavirus, which meant that he had to self-isolate and would be out of action. You don't have it as well, do you? You keep coughing.
No, I had it back in March. This is just
standing.
Yeah.
Okay, right. Moving on. So yeah, Hamilton unfortunately contracted it somehow. Along with the two Racing Point drivers, Sergio Perez and Lance Stroll, that meant he had to sit out the race. Now, in those cases, Nico Hülkenberg came in to fill in for Perez and Stroll in their respective races that they were set out for. However, Hamilton, everyone was like, Hülkenberg, please. Hülkenberg needs his podium. But instead, it's another driver who it keeps on not getting something, and that's points instead. And that was George Russell, who is a Mercedes junior. And then his seat was filled in by Jack Aitken, the F2 driver, who I did think did a really good job. But in terms of the race itself, well, it was a bit chaotic, wasn't it? So just to put it into perspective, the shortest lap traditionally on the F1 calendar is about a 1:10 something. And that's normally at Monaco. And at Monaco, they do about 78 laps. Obviously, we haven't been to Monaco this year, but this new Sakhir Grand Prix would take place on the outer layout of the Bahrain Grand Prix circuit, using the same few corners peeling off from the traditional Grand Prix route as the 2010 endurance layout, which we saw Fernando Alonso win it on his Ferrari debut. However, instead of then looping back around and joining the Grand Prix track at the same point, it instead cuts off completely the entire middle sector, and so a lap there takes about 50-ish seconds. So it's less than a minute. As a result, we had an 87-lap race for the Sakhir Grand Prix. It was absolute chaos. So first, I want to talk about, first of all, mainly George Russell. So George Russell came into the Mercedes seat. He was someone to have to like squeeze in there. He probably had to cover himself in lubricant just to get in easily, because he's about 6'2" and his feet are too big, and he had to wear the size too small shoe. But he did phenomenally. He actually only qualified about a quarter of a tenth of a second behind Valtteri Bottas, which is, considering he's been driving a Williams all year, then jumping to Mercedes is brilliant. So, James, I imagine, were you following F2 and GP3 when Russell started making the rounds in that at all?
Yeah, I was. I think I became aware of him when he was in, I think, European F3. But yeah, when he started racing in GP3 with, funnily enough, Jack Aitken as his teammate. It felt like such a good opportunity. I mean, I was a bit torn when people were speculating who was going to replace Hamilton, because like you said, I kind of wanted Hülkenberg to get that shot, to potentially get his first podium. But then also Stoffel Van Dorn was flying in, the Mercedes reserve driver. And I thought, I'd love him to get it because he had such a terrible time at McLaren. And I felt like he deserved a bit of an F1 redemption. But then also, I really wanted to see what George Russell could do in that car. I felt he's been pushing that Williams far beyond what it deserves all year. And yeah, he thoroughly earned that, I think. He was, like you said, he was phenomenal, that qualifying performance. I was a bit sad that he didn't out-qualify Bottas and that his record of out-qualifying teammates was broken. So I think up until then, he could have, next season, he could have beaten Michael Schumacher's record for most races out-qualifying a teammate in a row, which would have been nice to see a Schumacher record not broken by Hamilton. But yeah, being like 0.026 seconds, I think, off Bottas, off the guy who's been in the car all season long, for someone who's never been in Q3 before, has never been through that procedure, never been through a qualifying procedure with the team generally. And I think he said it might have been in his Q1 lap or something. He was still figuring out like where the buttons were on the steering wheel, and he accidentally put the car into neutral on one of his laps, which made me feel better for doing that in my driving lessons so many times. But yeah, that was, I don't know how to describe it. He blew me away how ready he was for that. I think he thoroughly proved that his name is on that seat. He belongs at that top table, I think.
Very much so. And we will get to a point in the race where Russell and Bottas were battling and it just sort of went completely one way, we'll say. So, but obviously there's more people to talk about in that. So at the start of the race, obviously we saw Russell manage to get ahead of Bottas, and Bottas was struggling to get out the first few corners. But then Verstappen tried to go past, Bottas blocked him off. Perez went around the outside of Verstappen, and then Charles Leclerc came out of nowhere, he'd put in a phenomenal qualifying lap. But I think Vettel was criticising him last week for making too many banzai manoeuvres, and now it's sort of like it's come up trumps again because Leclerc outbraked himself, smacked into Perez, spun Perez around, which when you consider the result later, which obviously if you're listening to this, you probably know what it is amazing. But yeah, Leclerc, a bit unrefined, honestly. And now, I've always said that Leclerc's definitely one of the most talented drivers on the grid, but he has still got some rough edges in there, and he needs to rectify that. Simon, do you have any comments on Leclerc's crash at the beginning of the race?
It's one of those things, isn't it? I mean, it all happened very soon after the start, and I don't think there was any penalty. Oh no, he has got a penalty, hasn't he?
Grid penalty, free place in Abu Dhabi.
Do you know what? It's really, really sad. But the thing that stands out in my mind is Jos. God, showing my age again. Max kicking the barrier when he got out with frustration. Yeah, I mean, he ruined the race for not only himself but for Jos. I mean, it could have been very different. But
you said Jos again.
Yeah, I did, didn't I? I am old. Come on, I probably don't.
Well, when Mick Schumacher joins the grid next year, you'll call him Mike.
Yeah, I'll just go with Schumi.
That works.
Yeah, it works. We haven't even got to David Schumacher yet. I mean, obviously ruined the race for himself, ruined it for Max, and but without that, we wouldn't have had the race we did. So, indeed.
Well, I just said it there. Perez, he benefited from having to pit, and then he was on the back of the safety car line. Perez got going again, and it did look like, even with Sainz putting a move on Bottas, which Bottas managed to get back through on him, that it was going to be a Mercedes walkthrough. There was a lot that happened in this race, but it kind of mainly chalks up to the pit blunder. So it was Jack Aitken who on his debut, despite qualifying a world champion and being only a 10th off of his vastly more experienced teammate, he then sort of clattered the barrier, left some debris on the track, and then went for the pits, and that caused initially VSC and then a full safety car. Now, the Mercs had both pitted at this point. Russell had a very commanding lead, even though after a first VSC, his lead got eaten into by Bottas. But they went to the pits, and we all thought, well, I don't know why they feel the need here. They've got Perez behind them, who has about as equally as old hard tyres, maybe even just a little bit younger, but not so much that he's going to be a threat. But they decided to try and cover them off anyway. Russell came in. Pit stop went just fine. They go back out, tried to put Bottas' tyres on, bit of hesitation. We're like, well, what's this about? And then for some reason, they put Bottas back out on the same tyres that he had coming into the pits. And we initially didn't know why they did this. But then it all became very apparent. Russell was called back into the pits, and we found out that Merck had put some of Bottas's tyres on. Now, Merck have made some rather blunderous errors in the past, and they've been quite, understandable, forgivable. But how could they mess up like this? Like, I'm not an F1 pit mechanic. I'm not an F1 team member, but they've had the Hockenheim 2019 disaster when Hamilton went off near the final corner and cut into the pits, and they were dressed up in 1950s decor back in that day, and they probably did a pit stop that would be quick in the 1950s. Mm-hmm. But then also the Monza this year when Hamilton pitted when the pit lane was closed, which honestly I did think that was pretty understandable as to how it happened. But this I just don't get. And it robbed George Russell of a win. I'll get onto that in a bit, but okay, we have to talk about this. Pit lane error. How on earth did this happen? So, James, go first.
I wonder if they got some lessons from Red Bull, because it just reminded me of the pit stop for Ricciardo in Monaco in 2016. At least they had the tyres ready, but I think, what was it that they said? It was like there was a radio miscommunication with like half of Russell's side of the garage heard the call to pit, but the other half didn't, so they had the tyres in the wrong order. And yeah, it's one of those things that it happens. I mean, it's human error, but also you forget sometimes that the Mercedes team are human because they're so good. So it's rare for any team to make an error like that, but especially a team like Mercedes. I saw on Twitter today they put out saying we cost a young man his first F1 win yesterday and we're hurting. And it's good to see that a team like that, I think, they know that it was their mistake and they know what it meant and that they can own up to that. And I'm sure they're doing a lot. I'm sure they're drilling pit stop practice as much as they can. And their pit stops in Abu Dhabi are going to be bang on. It's a rare issue, isn't it? And it hurts, I think, for us watching, because like I said, it cost Russell the win, but yeah, it's just a bad day for them.
Yeah.
Got anything on that, Simon?
Well, I think what caused it was where the safety car fell, where they called the safety car, where George and Valtteri were on track. They had to double stack them, and there wasn't a lot of time to think, okay, I'll grab this tyre and check the label. I mean, I think that's what happened. I think it was literally, I didn't read the label, pulled out a tyre, and it was, you saw that moment where he's trying to put that, was it the front left on? The penny seemed to drop at that point. Not before that. It was, Russell had gone, it was clear they were thinking they were winning the race, and then the penny dropped. And we all thought, it was just a Valtteri problem. He was going to have to come back in the pits. George was fine. George was going to win this. And obviously that wasn't the case. On the plus side, though, you can see George is going to win races. He's going to be in that car at some time in the future, and he's going to be win races, and he's going to be a superstar. Unfortunately, there is a mega star in front of him, which he'll probably be a teammate with. And, I guess we're going to get onto the, is George as good as Lewis in the same car? Something, jumping ahead, something you can't tell. Unless Lewis was driving that weekend, you can't say for sure, yeah, he was faster or the same speed, because all through the season, Lewis has been all over Bottas, really. He's just destroyed him for most of the season. So who's to say that he wouldn't have been that much further ahead of George? Sorry, going off topic.
No, it's completely valid. We will get onto that at some point. But yeah, as a result of that blunder, Russell came up behind Bottas, and they were behind Stroll, Ocon, and the leader, Perez, who had been last at that point. So what ended up happening, Russell made very quick work of Bottas, and he, with an incredible manoeuvre around the outside of that very awkward turn 6 into the 7 and 8 chicane, a move which was repeated by Carlos Sainz, funnily enough, later on in the race. Then Russell went on about his business on the medium tyres. They were much fresher than the hards on everyone else. He was eating into the lead, like he'd already passed Stroll and Ocon, eating into the lead of Perez, looking relatively likely he would probably eventually get through. And then my heart dropped for a second time when we heard it initially. We thought that Bottas, in my household at least, we thought Bottas had a puncture, and I was like, no wait, I'm sure that was Russell, the radio graphic on the screen. And then it brings up Russell's onboard camera on the scoring pylon at the side, and I see him going to the pits. He's like, no, he's going into the pits again. He was like, Russell had no luck that day, it seems, and we all thought that because of the meme that he'd never scored points, that he was going to continue that even in the Mercedes. Like, it's our very own Chris Lord. He said something to me. I don't know if it was to me or in the group chat. I can't remember. Saying, imagine if all the bad luck for Hamilton's car just comes in one big swoop when he's not in it. And I'll be like, that would be just so typical. But holy crap, it nearly very much did. Because Russell pitted, he went to the back of the field, he was on soft tyres. Bottas started going backwards. He was passed by Sainz, by Ricciardo, by Fiat. Russell got back up to 9th in the end, thankfully. So he did score points and another one for fastest lap. So it was a bad day for Mercedes, but who were to capitalise on that but the pink Mercedes? Sergio Perez. Let's talk about him, because he has been in F1 since 2011. He very nearly won the Malaysian Grand Prix in 2012. I remember being up early that day to watch it and hoping that it would happen and thinking, what does the Mexican anthem sound like?
Yeah, we were all thinking that.
Yeah, and then 9 years later, it's not like I could just go on YouTube and listen to it. It's like, oh, that's what it sounds like.
Do you know what I was saying to my wife when he got to the podium? I can imagine some guy on a computer desperately trying to download from iTunes the national anthem.
Reminded me of when Alan Jones won his first Grand Prix in the 70s, and they didn't have the Australian national anthem. So I think there was some guy in the crowd who had a trumpet who could play it.
No, it wasn't that at all. They didn't even play the anthem. I think they just played Happy Birthday.
That was it, yeah.
Yeah, I don't even think it was Alan Jones's birthday. But yeah, funnily enough, it's another thing like Charles Leclerc, when he won the feature race at Jerez, which wasn't supporting F1 that day. It was the F2 GP3 standalone at the GT Open, I think, and Euroformula Open. And it was like the national anthem of France. Da, 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 da. And he's just like, what? I am not French. I am Monegasque. And everyone was laughing. And then they just come back on the intercom and say, sorry for the interruption. It's actually Monaco. And then the actual Monaco anthem played. But yeah, so going back to Perez, he's been in F1 since 2011, had 190 races. And we probably thought that, considering that he's probably not in for a drive next year, that he's not going to end up winning a race at all. But he finally did, and him and Ocon as well for getting his first podium were both crying on the radio. It's just, I think this year has just been even though we've had mostly Hamilton wins, we've also got two very good feel-good stories. But not even that, but Norris getting on the podium for the first time, Gasly winning at Monza, and now Perez winning the Sakhir Grand Prix. This year has been quite bipolar, would be the word, I guess, very extreme in opposing ends, because on one side, again, Hamilton dominance, other side, all these amazing results. So I wish we had Adam here, because Adam is also a big Perez fan. I'm guessing we're all Perez fans at the moment. So James, give us your thoughts on on a win for a man who should definitely be in F1 next year.
I think just to start backwards, and I suppose, yeah, you make a good point about the season. Like, it's been quite a paradoxical season, really. Like, I think one of the criticisms that's quite often been levelled at F1 this year is that there's been no competition. The Mercedes have been way too far ahead. And yet we've also had an Alpha Tauri and a Racing Point win races. We've had a Racing Point on pole. We've had, 13 different podium finishes.
Yes.
It's been so odd seeing that. Like, yeah, the races where the Mercedes have been so far ahead and Hamilton's finished first and second at almost every single race this year. And then, yeah, we get a result like this. And it really is a fantastic feel-good story. Like, yeah, mentioning them 2012 Malaysia, I feel like Perez's win has been coming ever since then, or it's felt like, the last 8 years for him have been building up to this, or he's been waiting for this moment. And yeah, I mean, I wouldn't say that Perez is one of my favorite drivers, but he's such a popular driver and he's such a well-loved driver that even if he's not your favorite, you can't help but be happy for him to finally achieve this, especially if you've been watching most of his career and you remember like the year that he had at McLaren and how he almost went out of F1 there and got the kind of last minute reprieve with Force India. And yeah, I mean, I was gutted that Russell lost the race, but if anyone else had to pick up that win, I am so glad it was Perez. I think that was the only kind of sweetener there. I think that it went to such a deserving driver. And yeah, and he's not on the grid next year. How is that possible? How is, spun around on the first lap to the back of the grid, comes through to become a Grand Prix winner? Yeah. How has he not got a seat, for crying out loud?
I mean, I don't know if it was on purpose, but when he got out of the car, he just sort of like put his arms out, and it was just almost reminiscent of the quote from Gladiator. Are you not entertained? It's just so like, what else does he have to do? Did he have to like sacrifice his son to the devil or something to get an F1 drive? It's
exactly like it's not just that he's been driving well this season or that he's a deserving driver. It's that he's been on the form of his life. I think he's up there with Verstappen and Hamilton as one of the top drivers this season. And now he's won a race. Like, literally, what else does he have to do to get a seat? Other than beat Hamilton to the World Championship, what else does he have to do?
I mean, you would think of all the drivers who would struggle to get a seat, it wouldn't be someone who literally has like, billions backing him.
Exactly. He brings so much backing as well. Like, yeah.
What more do you want from a driver?
With someone like Nico Hülkenberg, you can kind of understand him not finding a seat because he's never really brought funding. But Perez brings funding and results. Yeah. And he's not really old. He's the perfect driver.
Hülkenberg does have some backing, but just not to the level of Perez. It's cut out.
I think he's got a chance at Latifi's seat. Williams want money. Whether it's the Williams team themselves or the new owners, they need that money. That's why Latifi's in that seat. But he's not going to get them any results. He's not exactly shining. He's been out-qualified by Russell all the way. So surely...
Latifi is not a driver who... he only ever had, and I've said this before now, but Latifi's a nice guy. I'll give him that, because unlike Mazepin, he's actually a decent human, from what I see. You can tell I don't like Mazepin. But Latifi, he only was ever good in F2, like in that 1 year out of 5 seasons, and was never any good before that. So, he is only there because of money. But if Williams were willing to, like, I know they've got new owners and all, but surely there's some kind of pre-existing agreement that's preventing them from kicking out Latifi. As much as I'd like it, I don't see it happening, unfortunately. I really hope it does. But, I don't see it happening. So
there's too many paid drivers. I mean, there's always been paid drivers, but to this extent, it's getting a bit silly. Was it PK who's now basically said that's it? He's calling time on his F2 possible F1 career, because he comes from money, doesn't he? Really, but he can't. Lewis, this is what the standard. Lewis gets a lot of criticism, but he really is the only working class person on that grid, from what I can tell.
Well, that's not necessarily true. I think, Vettel, I think he didn't come from much money. I don't think Ocon or Raikkonen did either.
I know Ocon came from quite a humble background, and that's why Mercedes stepped in early on to support his career.
Yeah.
I say humble in inverted commas because obviously humble racing driver is still probably more money than we have.
Yeah, definitely. Yeah, I
a
think
natural progression like other sports. You know, other sports, for instance, my son was very good at tennis at one time and could have taken it a lot further if he'd wanted to go in that direction. But he could do that just out of talent alone. You can't do that in motor racing if you've got just talent, because that's not going to sustain you. You and I both know car drivers that are immensely talented and can't get the money to just go take a step up to Formula 4. You know, there's at some point we've got to, you know, put our hands up and say this sport can't be just about very well-off families buying their way into the sport. You know,
we all have to sort of like recognize that it all begins at a low level. So I don't know if you know this, Rob Smedley, who used to be Felipe Massa's race engineer, he comes from actually the town that I go to university in, and as a result, they had planned to actually host something at the local kart track. He's got a series going on called the Electro Heads. Yeah, and
he added me on LinkedIn, as you do.
He was?
He added me on his LinkedIn.
Oh, really? I need to get in touch with him, actually. Because he's actually promised to help me with my Road to Glory series. But I think because he likes the idea of a driver coming from my hometown near Middlesbrough. But his series, in the same way that I think, you know, the W series, the drivers in that don't pay at all. All the cars are sort of just paid for like in advance, and the drivers go there and actually are merited as opposed to paying. I mean, I imagine they have to pay some kind of deposit, but
no
sorry,
claims, insurance and no claims bonus needed.
probably. But whilst the likes of, you know, F3, F2, that unfortunately can't not go without money. I think giving the drivers very low downs a chance to like a platform to appeal for sponsors in a grassroots series. Like my idea would be to have like a karting series where, you know, they have like 20 drivers in each category, and each driver it's there because they auditioned. They don't just turn up with their own kart and compete, because at that point the costs go through the roof. There definitely has to be a way of vetting the process so that, you know, because especially now with a lot of the teams having to now go through some kind of cost cutting measures. Like James, you are going to be covering F3 and F2, but they'll be on separate weekends and free races as opposed to 2 on each weekend. So they've done that so to limit the amount of like money it will take to sort of get everyone to in F3 or F2 divisions, because I think all but 2 F2 teams also compete in F3. So having the money going down there, now it's definitely showing nowadays that there needs to be some kind of some measures being taken now at long last to rectify the issues. So I can't remember why we started talking about that now. I just sort of started rambling, didn't I? But I will, since we are talking about F2, I guess we could talk about the racing over the weekends in the 2 Bahrain weekends, because we saw Mick Schumacher win the championship. So James, you've been following Mick Schumacher's progress in F2 for the last 2 seasons. I think Mick Schumacher was already a bit of a marked banner when he first arrived in the F1 support paddock, if you will, because he being the son of Michael Schumacher, obviously, you know, everyone sort of expects the best out of him, but then others will just say, oh, he's only there because of the surname, even though he came into F2 having won the European F3 Championship. So how have you thought of his progress, and what do you think you can do in a Haas next year?
I'm really looking forward to seeing him in the Haas next year. I think it'll be, I think it'll be really good. I mean, with Mick, there's always it's become a cliche now that, you know, he takes a kind of sedate approach in his first season and then comes back stronger the next year. So maybe, yeah, maybe we don't sort of put too much pressure on him next year while he's kind of figuring out the series and all the procedures and everything he has to do. But yeah, he's been great this year. I mean, he had a bit of a rocky start to the season, but then he's gone on this run with, I know certainly at one point he had the most podiums of anyone. I don't know if that stood by the end of the year, but yeah, throughout Bahrain, he's like in those last 2 races alone, when he needed to have good races to keep that points gap over Callum Ilott, he did. And there was so many sort of audacious moves he made. Like you talked about the one that Russell did on Bottas around turn 6. And throughout the 2 F2 races in Sakhir, Schumacher was seemingly the only driver in the field that could make that move work. He was just, while everyone else was going for the DRS into turn 1, Schumacher was just slinging it around the outside of turn 6. And you were watching them and thinking, how is he doing this? How is he getting the car sort of that inch perfect and not just slamming into the side of whoever he's going around the outside of? So I think he's been great this season. I can't wait to see him in F1. It feels right having a Schumacher in F1 again.
Yeah,
I worry a little bit about the pressure that's going to be on him. Obviously, there's the question I feel for me is, what is he going to have to do to sort of to get that pressure off him, to stop being compared to his father? Because it's hard anyway for a racing driver, I think, who's had a successful father like Nico Rosberg with Keke or Nelson Piquet Jr. with Nelson Piquet. But when your father is the most successful driver of all time and arguably the most famous racing driver of all time, what I worry that no success he has in Formula One is ever going to quite be enough, because he's always going to be compared to his father. I hope that's not the case, but he seems like he's quite good at putting that kind of pressure behind him. I think he's obviously always had it throughout his career. And like I said, the kind of the 2-season approach he has to series, he's been remarkable so far, like coming into Formula 3 and having a not so good first season and everyone saying, it's just the name, it's just the hype. And he can put that behind him and win the title. And then he comes into F2 and everyone says, no, F3 is a fluke. It's just the name, it's just the hype. And then he comes back and he puts all of it behind him and wins the title again.
Exactly.
So I think, I think he'll be great. I can't wait to see that.
Go on, Simon, what were you saying?
So I would have loved to have seen him in the Red Bull so he could have had Schumacher and Verstappen. Just falls off the tongue, that one, doesn't it?
Well, maybe for you, but for younger people like me and James, it's not going to be the case.
Or they could have gone to Alpine, and then it would have been like the Benetton days.
Yeah. Oh, wow. And would you care to say in this case which? Because it was clear back in the 90s when Michael and Jos were teammates that Michael was the better driver, obviously. But now, what would you say about their sons? Who's the better driver?
At the moment, it has to be Max, but only time will tell. And Max, how old is Max now?
He was born in 97.
23?
20, yeah. He was 23 this year, yeah.
23 this year? I thought he was 24 this year. And how old?
Mick was born in 99, so he'll be like 21. Okay. Well,
these guys are younger. I mean, you look at Damon Hill, I don't think he was in a Williams until he was in his 30s. Probably his
Oh, yeah, he was 32 when he made his F1 debut.
Yeah.
Footwork. And then 39 when he retired. He wasn't with Footwork, he was with Brabham, I think.
Yes, it might be Brabham. Yeah, you're right.
Yeah, I know this, and I'm the younger one. I wasn't even born in 92.
It's because when you get older, all these things just blend, and you become forgetful. I can blame anything on my memory now. It's brilliant.
But speaking of Haas drivers, there was the other Haas seat, and a lot of people were campaigning for it to be Callum Ilott, the other Ferrari Academy driver who was ready for a step up to F1 and actually finished runner-up to Mick. But it's actually gone to Nikita Mazepin, who is an incredibly polarizing figure, one of the more disliked drivers, along with the likes of Dan Ticktum and Santino Ferrucci. But especially on that weekend, he was making just the most awful moves. Like, he was just shoving the drivers to one side. And again, I'm going to have to ask you about this, James, but you've been following Mazepin probably since, GP3, 2018? And I think we've spoken about him on the podcast before. Like, he was, he's been known to be a bit of an unsavory figure for a while now, and I think the only silver lining I can think of for Mazepin is the fact that not Mazepin, but for Lance Stroll, is that Lance Stroll will no longer be the one that we just sort of turn our head towards. It's going to be Mazepin. And I think rightfully so, because even though Mazepin has had like 2 years where he's been somewhat decent, like 2 bits of results, like runner-up in the World Karting Championship in 2014 to Lando Norris, and then runner-up in GP3 to Antoine Hubert, but very little in the way of results other than that. And he's had a semi-decent year this year. He ended 5th in the championship. But he's just not the best, not the driver I would have signed. So why don't you go and tell me what you've been thinking of Mazepin over the last couple of seasons?
Yeah, I think the moves you're talking about in Sakhir last week, like when I was watching the race, reporting on it, I was kind of stunned that a driver who's moving into Formula One was making those kind of moves. And if you weren't watching the race, I mean, he was leading the race, feature race, wasn't it? Was it the sprint race? I can't remember which way around it was now. Feature race. And every time he'd come down the pit straight and someone was trying to challenge for the lead, he'd move over to the right and almost run them into the pit wall. So they had no choice but to back out. And there was another move with Felipe Drugovich when and he ran him off the road into one of the braking marker boards. And he was eventually given 2 penalties. I think one of them was for blocking Drugovich, and the other one was for forcing, I think it was Yuki Tsunoda, onto the pit exit, which is obviously extremely dangerous. It was not a shining moment. I had to laugh. There was a tweet that Haas put out just after the final race where I'm going to try and find it now. It's just the wording of it.
I didn't actually look into this. You put it in the group chat.
It was just a picture of Mazepin, and it was just like Nikita finished P5 in the championship. And it was like, considering he went into the weekend 3rd, I just got the feeling they were a little bit disappointed that they kind of made the big deal of, we've signed this young driver, we're so looking forward to our future, and then he did that in the race. That was embarrassing. Now we've got to, like, I think you said it, Luca, we've made our bed, so we've got to lie in it.
Yep.
Yeah, I watched I'm going to give credit to someone. I watched an interesting video by Josh Revel on YouTube where he's talking about Mazepin's career. And I don't know if you watch as well, Luca, but
I love Josh Revel's videos. He's the best.
Yeah, he was going through Mazepin's results, and he has had a kind of patchy career. Like you said, he's had the highlights of being like runner-up in GP3 to Hubert. And then this year he has driven quite well. I think he could have been 3rd in the championship. He's won a couple of races. But then he's also had really nowhere years in a lot of Formula, like European Formula 3. And to be fair, he does seem to be a driver who gets better the quicker the car is, which could bode well for him in F1. But also, I'm not impressed by those moves he was pulling in the Sakhir races. Not looking forward to seeing those in F1 if he brings them through. I really hope that with the spotlight of being in an F1 team, those kind of things get ironed out at least. Yeah.
Well, go on.
Do you think Mazepin's senior plan is to buy Haas or Gene?
I think he has already bought like half the team. I wouldn't have been surprised.
He's been trying to buy F1 teams for years, hasn't he? He tried to buy Force India, and before they were sold to Lawrence Stroll, so I wouldn't be surprised.
He's also bought his son's seat time in a Mercedes.
I didn't know that.
No, he did. There's promotional videos, and apparently, this is like funny, but like apparently when Ocon was like their reserve driver for 2019, and obviously not racing, apparently he was asked to tutor Mazepin, and I'm like, that is just adding insult to injury. You are a former F1 driver who, because of money, has been forced out, and you're having to tutor a driver who could literally buy you. And we've heard about, I've mentioned it before, he's punched Callum Ilott after blocking him in F3 practice. Just very entitled
quite
behavior.
pressuring.
Yeah, like he just doesn't. I feel like a lot of people are just gonna, like, instead of hating on Lance Stroll, they're all gonna be like, Lance Stroll's gonna be like Michael Schumacher to them now. Like, we treated you too harshly. It's this guy who's the enemy. Yeah. So yeah,
I've been to Lance quite a bit the last year or so. he's put in some really good performances, hasn't he? He's matured, he's eloquent. I know his dad's bought the team, but there's buying the team and there's buying the team, isn't it?
Yeah. So
that's why you're the best toy in the world. If you can't drive it, you're not going to go.
One more F2 driver I want us to talk about, because we have a little bit of time left. Yuki Tsunoda, who could end up being the second AlphaTauri driver next year, just in time for Honda pulling out, unfortunately. Just 1 year with Honda engines that Honda could then take advantage of, get all the marketing and squeeze the milk out of the udder, so to say, if that's a bit an unsavory analogy. I apologize, but that basically Yuki Tsunoda has been so impressive this year. I genuinely thought he was going to be another one of those Red Bull victims who were forced into an F2 drive too early, because his car racing career has been 2 years in Japanese F4, the second of which he won. Then he moved up to FIA Formula 3 last year with Yenza and actually managed to win a race at Monza, if I'm not mistaken. And then he went straight to a Carlin drive, and I'm just like, oh no, he's not going to do well, unfortunately. And I'm so glad I was wrong, because he has done phenomenally. He's had plenty of poles, plenty of victories. He was top first-year driver, finished third in the championship. And I'm genuinely very happy that the prospect of seeing a Japanese driver back in F1. So, James, what's your opinion been on Yuki Tsunoda?
I'm completely in agreement with what you just said, Luca. When he was in F3 last year, he had a few good races and he won that race at Monza. And I was a bit surprised that he went up to F2 so quickly, and I thought, not sure this is the right move. He's got obviously the spotlight of Red Bull and Honda on him. And with, Red Bull's driver program being in a little bit of a mess at the moment, I thought there's going to be so much pressure heaped on him to succeed and get that F1 seat. And he seemed to just sail under that and, just soaked up that pressure. He's been one of the outstanding drivers this season. To consider the fact that he's never really been considered a title contender. He's mathematically in it until Sakhir, but he was always just sort of written off as, well, he's mathematically in it, but he's not going to win it. And yet he ended the season 1 point off Callum Ilott. And I think so. I think it's partly helped by the fact that Callum Ilott finished out of the points in the Sakhir sprint race, as did Mick Schumacher. But yeah, he was 14 points off the... I'm just going to have to double check this because now I'm doubting myself, even though I am the Formula 2 editor. But
hey, well, I am the guy who mentioned on the Pitcast when Hamilton did his GP2 sprint race, he spun several times, and then it looked like it was only the one time, and I looked like a right idiot.
Yeah, Tsunoda finished 200 points. Callum Ilott was on 201, and Mick Schumacher 215. So he's been brilliant. I mean, yeah, he had a bit of a rough start to the season. There was a weird patch where he either finished on the podium or didn't finish in the points at all. But then from the second Silverstone weekend on, if he's finished in the points, he's not finished any lower than 6th. And that includes 2 wins, another podium. He's got something like 3 or 4 pole positions. He's going to be mega in that AlphaTauri.
Yeah. And
the way Red Bull go as well, he could be in the Red Bull by Melbourne.
I'm Melbourne.
Do you think Albon has lost his seat?
What do you think, James?
I haven't known how to call this the entire season, and I still don't.
No, here's what's going to happen, because it keeps on going on the opposite after you speak, apparently. So if you just say now what it is, it'll be the opposite.
Exactly. I wrote an article about this a little while ago, and I said this feels like the kind of Schrodinger's cat of the driver market. Like, it's either Perez or Albon, and we just won't know until it's announced. And Turkey, he had a really unfortunate race where he was in contention for the win and then sort of span out, and it looked like that might be the final straw. But then the last few weekends in the paddock, he's seemed a completely different person. Like, he's been so upbeat in interviews, which he hasn't been all year. And there was a part of me that thought he's been given the nod for next year. Even if he's not signed the contract, he's got an extra confidence somewhere. And I wonder if they've just said, okay, you're safe. We'll finalise everything after the season's done, but know that you're in the seat for next year.
So the psychological boost and see how he
Yeah, but then Perez goes and wins the race, and Albon finishes quite a way back. I can't even remember where he finished in the end, but he was. It was another one of those indicators of, the guy who's contending for this seat goes and wins the race. When on the day when Mercedes cock everything up, the person who, based on the pace of the car, should have inherited that win, you'd assume it would be Albon because he's in the second fastest car, and yet instead it's Perez. And there was, I think Will Buxton said there was some sort of heavyweight chatter in the paddock after Sunday that something might be about to change for the better for Perez's future. Hinting, I think, that, that's maybe done it for Red Bull. But then equally, I just don't know how to call it. I would genuinely not be surprised, even after the season he's had, if Red Bull turn around and say, we're keeping Albon for next year. The one thing is, I think, it's more than just next year, because obviously the cars are staying roughly the same for next year. So I think Red Bull obviously know if they put Perez in the car for next year, even if he's a marked improvement on Albon, they're not going to be fighting Mercedes for the title. And they're also, it's not going to make much of a difference because they're still going to be P2 in the championship, unless the new engine that Ferrari are bringing for next year is, a legal version of the 2019 engine. Red Bull are going to be a safe P2 in the championship, and they're not going to do any better than that with any other driver. So it's the long-term future, because what they don't want is to keep Albon, obviously, and then him not improve next year either, and them still be in this position in September, October, and then be looking at is Yuki Tsunoda ready to go up to Red Bull after a year? Do we bring back Pierre Gasly? Do we now look outside the Red Bull driver program? But I genuinely don't know how to call it, and that's been the problem all the year, that I've been trying to work out what's happening, and like you said, it's been the opposite every single time.
I have to say, I think you can't compare the way that Red Bull are doing it with anyone else. They've got a race winner in Max, and probably, arguably, a special driver in the same way that Lewis is a special driver. If you took someone of Albon's age or experience and stuck him next to Lewis in the same team, Lewis would annihilate him. He would demoralise him. He would break him. So, you could say, for argument's sake, put Mick Schumacher in the car with Lewis. It wouldn't matter how good Mick is. That would happen, and he would lose confidence. And that is what Red Bull have done. They brought someone in who had very little experience in Formula One, let alone a top team, and put him in a car capable of winning with someone who has won Grand Prix and is a special talent. That's never going to work. They're going to have to give him time. And not, maybe they shouldn't have done it in the first place. Really, they shouldn't have done it. They should have left him where he was to develop and stuck with Gasly. And they wouldn't have been in this situation. We wouldn't be having this conversation. We'd all be saying, yeah, Albon looks good. Maybe he'll move up to Red Bull. But now we're all worried about Albon's future, when he really hasn't been given a fair shot, in my opinion.
Yeah,
so a good point about the demoralising. We've seen, like you said, against Lewis Hamilton, and we've seen exactly the same thing with Bottas. But he's not been able to compete because Hamilton is that step ahead of him all the time, and it's the same with Verstappen and Albon. And yeah, it becomes a vicious cycle, doesn't it? That you have a few bad races, and then it's hard to recover from that, especially when you got the glare of the media, like us.
Yeah, that's a look.
Yes. So, which I'm actually kind of glad you said that, James. I will just say it's been clarified that even if Albon were to lose the Red Bull seat, there is no fallback on AlphaTauri. So that would be it for him, apparently. But since you said that, I said we would talk about it. Do we think after the race on Sunday that Russell should be with Mercedes full time alongside Hamilton instead of Bottas? Who wants to take that?
I'll say, personally, I think yes. I think he's now gained experience. He had 2 seasons in a car in Formula One. Yes, it wasn't competitive, but he's shown his talent throughout that time and has grown not only as a racing driver, as a man. You could see that. Bottas has had his chance. There's something, not that Bottas isn't an exceptional driver, because he clearly is, or he wouldn't be in Formula One, but he hasn't got enough to compete with Lewis in that top level in the way that Nico Rosberg was. Nico had that little extra that he could pull out of the bag if he really, really wanted to, or really pushed himself to get that much closer. But maybe Mercedes are happy with that. You know, they've got a nice, calm team. Everything works well. And Bottas is a team player.
James, do you want to have a say on that?
I think the decision's already been made. I saw it reported in, I think, BBC and Autosport that before Mercedes offered Bottas a new contract this year, they approached Williams to see if they'd let Russell go a year early. And Claire Williams at the time said no. So they re-signed Bottas.
Well, now that Williams is under new ownership, Doralton Capital, you get to make that decision since their head is called James Matthews. I do that every time, I'm sorry.
I've been waiting on that one.
Go on, James, let Russell go. We need him at Mercedes.
It's a good point, because Russell did say he's hoping that he's given Toto Wolff a headache, not just for 2022, but next year. I don't see them suddenly dropping Bottas now. I don't quite think they'd do that. But I feel like, the decision's already been made. That there was a wording in the statement when they announced Bottas's contract. It was something like, Bottas will race for us for one more year at least. And it was like, you didn't have to specify one more year, because that sounds like that's all they're thinking. It feels like, I don't know, it feels like for the last kind of year or so, we've known that really Russell is he's the future for their team. Maybe Bottas has just kind of been treading water until he was ready to get up there, which Russell has proved he has. And I think, if there was one other thing that Mercedes learned at the Sakhir Grand Prix, it's that when Hamilton's not there, if he's either out of the race for some reason, or if he's not in the team, if he retires in the future, Bottas isn't the driver they can depend on. The driver they can depend on is Russell.
So I must say then, let's say Hamilton goes for that 8th title and is successful next year. He's got the 100 poles, he's got all that. Retires. Does Russell come in alongside Bottas, or do they get a new driver lineup altogether? Does Russell get in there with another teammate? Who would that be? I
think if Hamilton retired, if he either didn't sign a contract for next year, or like you said, if he won the 8th title and then retired, I think that's probably Bottas's only real hope of keeping that seat, because I think Mercedes like that consistency. I'm not sure they would want to, make a big money move to throw like Max Verstappen and George Russell in together in the same year. I think they'd probably go with Russell and keep Bottas at least for a couple of years until they can see what the driver market is. Just one thing I wanted to say on Bottas, I forgot to mention it a moment ago. I'm a little bit loath to criticise Bottas a bit too much, because I very vividly remember 2018 was the year that he didn't win a single race with Mercedes, and there were, quite similar calls of, is he not good enough? Does he deserve the seat?
He did give up one of the wins, didn't he?
Yeah. But then he revealed at the end of the year that him and his wife have been going through a divorce for most of the year, and you thought, that explains, why he's been so demoralised and so, not quite there. So
was that 2018 or 2019? I'm sure it was the end of 2019.
I thought it was 2018, but I could be wrong. But yeah, I'm always. You can tell with Bottas, it's not just that he's not on Hamilton's level. He looks so demoralised this year, and I hope there's not something else going on in the background. I know he gets a lot of stick on social media and a lot of insults, and so I'm reluctant to sort of pile in too much. But yeah, equally.
We know he's a great driver. He wouldn't have got to Formula One races. He's just not. It's gonna be hard to find someone on the same level as a Lewis.
Exactly. Yeah.
Max
and
he's good. He's not on that level yet. He's not that consistent.
In all fairness, though, whenever Hamilton outqualifies him, the majority of the time, it's only by a few tenths.
Yeah.
And if Bottas was as bad as people say, he would outqualify him by half a second. But it's not that at all. Like, Bottas is any other teammate, and Bottas would look like a god. Maybe.
That's the thing. Like, Bottas manages to outqualify Lewis Hamilton. It might not happen all the time, but it has happened. And Lewis Hamilton is the greatest qualifier of all time, statistically. And Bottas has beaten Hamilton in races as well, and Hamilton has the most race wins of all time. So he's he might not match up to Hamilton on every weekend, but to do it at all, to do it once, is a phenomenal achievement.
Throw that back at you, Luca. Who would you like to see?
Who would I like to see at Mercedes? I do like the idea of Verstappen and Russell lineup, because there was a picture of them when they were teammates in European karting driver for the Interpret karting team, and plus also Verstappen had a go at Russell after Russell came to Albon's defence at Hungary this year, basically saying we should just look at your own team then. But as a British fan, I would love to see because they sort of teased the idea before Norris went to Carlin instead of ART alongside Russell, which probably was the reason why it wasn't as close as it was. But Russell and Norris, for me, at Mercedes, that would be a phenomenal team. But then again, you've also got the likes of Ricciardo, maybe Leclerc if he and Ferrari inevitably go south, because it seems to with every Ferrari driver apparently. Having a lineup like that, I would love to see. Like, even if it resulted in, tension, I would love to see like Russell be a champion, Norris be a champion, and then 2022 looking so great in terms of the potential of, if all the cars are as close together as possible, we've got some of the best drivers, even if the majority of the grid is made up of like Latifis and Mazepins. Having like, the likes of Ricciardo, Leclerc, Verstappen, and then budding likely great drivers such as Norris and Russell, all in like competitive cars, it could be phenomenal. And hopefully it happens. But as far as it is a bit, I think Russell's destined for a Mercedes drive, but it is sort of uncertain as to if Bottas were to be given the boot, who it would end up being, his teammate. It's a whole variety of drivers. No idea.
Ricciardo in a really decent car. Maybe he'll get that next year with McLaren. So
him and Norris at McLaren, I still can't. I'm so excited for that. That's going to be great.
It's like, wow.
I'm looking forward to that too. I would, just to throw my own thing my own hat in the ring, Russell and Gasly. Ooh. If Toto Wolff retired from the team principal role and Mercedes called me and said, right, your first goal is to fill the
You're doing a very good job with Williams at the moment. We need you at Mercedes.
Lewis has decided
exactly like Toto Wolff, funnily enough. He went from Williams to Mercedes as well.
Yeah, if they said Lewis has decided to retire, Valtteri's got an offer from another team, he's gone, who do we get? I'd say Russell Gasly.
Okay, then. I do think Gasly probably end up at Alpine. I think maybe I don't know where Ocon would go.
He gets another chance at a top drive. He deserves it.
I'd also love to see him alongside Leclerc at Ferrari one day, because they're such good friends.
Yeah.
Well, then that would just go south, wouldn't it?
Yeah, true.
Norman Nato now in a Formula E car. He's a talent.
I didn't catch who you said.
Norman Nato in Formula E.
Norman Nato. Well, he has just gone to Formula E, but I don't see an avenue for him to get to F1. There's a lot of hypotheticals here.
Yeah, he was very when he was young. They're all young, but he was very competitive at one time. So.
Yeah, he did hold his own against Leclerc in 2017. Probably not to a huge extent, but I think there was a few cases when Neto was doing quite well. Anyway, look, if we keep on talking, we're probably going to end up with another two-parter like we did for the Emilia-Romagna Grand Prix. So Aaron and everyone else who edits, we're gonna stop it here, otherwise we'll be going on forever. So thank you, gentlemen, for discussing what ended up being not only a Bahrain and Sakhir Grand Prix debrief, but also just talking about F1 world in general. Next weekend is the Abu Dhabi Grand Prix. We'll be definitely doing a debrief for that. I'm not making any false promises because, last debrief we had, I was like, we'll be back for Bahrain. We weren't. We held it off a week because the influx of...
We'll have a much better schedule next season.
Yeah, we do need to discuss that.
This season.
So, thank you, everyone. We should do... We always forget this. Driver of the day, quickly. James?
Russell.
For Sakhir. And Simon?
Russell. That's the way.
A toss-up between Russell and Perez, honestly. Oh, yeah, and Pietro Fittipaldi got 4% of the vote. Like, he got third. which I think is pretty amazing. It's probably just all of Brazil.
And Lance didn't do badly in third.
Yeah.
Like,
And Ocon getting his first podium.
Yeah, all very good shouts. Anyway, yeah, sorry. So Twitter handles, social media, right? I on social media, on Twitter you can find me at redluca56. James?
I'm on Twitter at James16Matthews.
Simon?
And I'm at F1 Taxi.
Breathe. Thank you very much for listening, everybody. We do appreciate it, and we'll see you out on track.